Regulation is one of the levers that we can pull to help shape the development and use of AI. In our next session, we will hear from 4 leading regulators about how they're responding to the opportunities and challenges that AI presents. Please join me in welcoming my colleague, Isabelle de Pauw, who will be moderating the session alongside Stephen Almond, Andrew Breeze, Kate Jones, Ed Towers, and Will Hayter.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Isabelle de Pauw. I am an Associate Director at Milltown Partners. It's really lovely to see so many of you in this room here this morning. And I'm super delighted to welcome the UK's leading regulators to discuss the regulation of AI, this all-important topic, share learnings from each other, and talk about sort of current, future successes and any lessons learned. We'll also kind of get a sense of how they've been working together to create a sort of coherent regulatory framework in the UK and enable that sort of all-important growth that is very high on the current government's and as well as industry's agenda. So we are joined by the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum, which is a world-leading initiative of regulators working together, and it's for member regulators as well. So it's my pleasure to introduce them to you, and we will launch into a Q&A, and then we'll have like 10 minutes at the end as well to take questions from the audience as well. We'll start out with Kate, with you, if that's okay, and can you sort of first of all introduce yourself and your role as well at DRCF, and then we'll kind of talk about, growth and innovation as a sort of very high priority on the regulators and the government's agenda, and we've heard a lot about sort of AI and the role that it plays in creating growth for the economy as well. And so we'd really love to hear kind of, as a DRCF that brings all of the sort of regulators together as well, what the role is in your mind of the regulator in enabling that growth in AI in particular, and sort of how you've been working together with regulators to enable that growth as well.
Yes, thank you, Isabelle. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. My name's Kate Jones. I lead the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum, a bit of a mouthful, the DRCF. It essentially brings the 4 digital regulators together, those represented on this panel, and they will each talk more about their own work in a moment. I thought I would start this morning by talking about why are we here? What's the role of the regulators on AI? You will have just heard from Natalie Black from Ofcom, of course, so you've already heard from a regulator this morning. But if we think about AI, it's not a sector of our economy, it's like a layer. It's something that's coming into all different parts of our economy. Many of you will have already used AI this morning, one way or another. Perhaps if you looked at a digital map to work out the best way to get here, or to look for travel delays, perhaps if you've used predictive text, etc., etc. So AI is coming in all over the place, and there are lots and lots of opportunities, as we've just been hearing from AI. But also I think people want AI to be deployed responsibly. And that's where the UK's regulators come in. We have a tradition in the UK of sensible regulation, of good laws that protect people against, for example, discrimination, that protect their privacy, that protect their consumer rights. And one of the primary roles of the regulators at the moment is to say, okay, how can we make sure that those laws are being applied properly as AI comes into the economy? So each regulator has its own initiatives, either in its sector and its cross-cutting roles, which they will talk about. But as DRCF, bringing these 4 regulators together, I want to give just 2 examples. One is about how we are helping to enable innovation and growth, and the second about how we're working together on parameters for responsible AI. So on the innovation and growth side, we set up, as a group of 4, something called the AI and Digital Hub last year. And that's a service for innovators or businesses who are thinking about, okay, how can we enable digital innovation, or how can we bring AI into our products and services? And innovators can come to us and say, we're thinking about setting up this app, or we're thinking about providing this service. Can you help us understand how regulation applies to your remits? And we will take their questions and give them a one-stop answer. It's an innovative service bringing regulators together to do this. And by this, we're hoping to, or we are promoting innovation and growth in the economy, showing that regulators are enabling. The other side I mentioned is on the responsible side. So we've worked together about some of the parameters for responsible AI, such as fairness, for example. So everybody says, oh, we need fairness in AI. But what actually does fairness mean? Fairness means something specific in human rights law and privacy. It means something else quite specific in consumer rights. So we've worked to put those together, and we've published a paper on this, again, to help businesses see what they need to do to implement AI fairly. We've done the same for transparency. And the last thing I'll mention is that we've worked on the AI assurance market. So assurance and audit are where people put their emerging AI systems to evaluators to check that they're going to be responsible. We've worked to help shape that market, because for us it's really important that you have a good AI assurance market that then means that you will have AI being deployed in a responsible way. So that's some examples of what we've done as a group.
Thank you so much. And it's always quite a challenge, I think, to sort of unpack responsible AI, but it's really nice to sort of see the example of how the DRCF has been working on fairness and transparency guidance and really put that into practice. We're also joined by Ed Towers from the Financial Conduct Authority this morning. And in a moment, I'll ask you to introduce yourself as well. But for those not aware, the FCA had its own sort of innovation hub for several years. And I think the FCA recently also held an open event to inform your regulatory approach to AI and in financial services. So following your sort of introduction, we'd be really keen to hear kind of what you see as the potential of AI in the financial sector and what the sort of FCA's role is in enabling that.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Ed Towers. I lead our advanced analytics and data science function, which means I am sort of a technologist looking at how we develop AI for regulation, but also lead our regulatory approach and strategy on AI together with policy colleagues. So I mean, maybe I'll answer the question in reverse order. So I think part of the role and part of the important thing for regulators is to make sure that regulation doesn't accidentally become a barrier to innovation. And I think that's something that the FCA has worked quite hard on. And so we've just celebrated the 10th anniversary of our innovation services. And in that time, we've had almost 1,000 firms come through our sandbox services, and I think you kind of see the measurable impact of that, because those firms that come through those services are 50% more likely to get investment, and the nature of that investment is often 15% higher. That was kind of an independent study that was done. So I think the regulator can provide quite an important role in helping to facilitate and ensure that firms looking to navigate and innovate can do that. We have a very strong UK fintech scene. And AI is the kind of latest evolution of that. So actually, we've already had about 200 firms come through those sandbox services with some form of AI, but the AI landscape, as we know, continues to evolve. What was AI a couple of years ago is slightly different to how we define it now. And so we have, just 2 weeks ago, we ran a series of events as part of our AI lab, where we showcased 12 innovative startups working in financial services and their AI solutions. We brought together about 150 people from across industry, academia, consumer groups, regulators, to work through some of the thinking around how does AI impact in financial services, what should our approach be, and we're going to continue we're going to use the sort of outcomes and the inputs of that day to help shape and refine those innovation services further. So we want to enhance our regulatory sandboxes so that they can do as much as possible to help firms as they develop AI solutions in a safe and effective way.
Thank you so much, Ed. And again, really nice to hear sort of how you've been working with industry as well to try and get this right. We are also joined by Will Hayter this morning, Executive Director for Digital Markets and Competition at the Competition and Markets Authority. Will, the Digital Markets unit is now formally live, and we're sort of very interested in hearing about how the Competition and Markets Authority is tracking developments in AI and how it's sort of considering what recent AI developments mean for markets and digital markets in particular as well. Can you shine a light for us on that?
Yes, thank you, and thanks very much for having me. So I would put our work on AI into three broad phases. If you go back several years, you had a sort of horizon scanning stage where we were just tracking these kinds of technologies alongside many others, thinking about their implications broadly. Several years ago, we had a broad paper on the effects of algorithms in markets, thinking about how those are used in pricing or how those might affect consumer vulnerabilities. That moved into a second stage as the generative AI wave hit, where we did a more specific, deeper dive into foundation models. And that was looking at both the opportunities in markets from those kinds of technologies and also the potential risks, and looking at the drivers that might push towards more positive or more negative outcomes. And we proposed and refined through that work a set of 6 principles that we thought would help nudge the market towards a more positive end of things. Those were access to inputs, choice, diversity of models, fair dealing, accountability, and transparency. I mean, that was 18 months ago or so now, and I think those have stood the test of time actually reasonably well, and have continued to help guide us in the way that we've been doing our work, and we've had lots of good engagement with all kinds of companies on those as well. But we're now into a third phase where I describe it more as AI just being simply part of business as usual, sort of permeating all of our work, both as a tool for us to use and in the way that we actually do our market-facing work. So on the AI as a tool side, I mean, we're using and piloting AI in various forms across a range of tools across the CMA, as I'm sure we all are, evidence review and in other ways. But perhaps the most interesting bit, I think, is what we've been doing on bid rigging in public procurement. So public procurement represents about a third of public expenditure, so really, really big numbers. And evidence from around the world, and the OECD has done a lot of work on this, suggests that bid rigging, that public procurement is actually quite vulnerable to, or can be vulnerable to anti-competitive behavior. So prevention of bid rigging or collusion in those kind of environments could actually represent a huge saving to the public purse. So we've been working with the government to bring together our cartels expertise and our data and AI expertise to try and help work out ways of detecting that kind of anti-competitive activity more effectively. But then if you look across our various market-facing tools, AI pops up in all kinds of places. So for example, in the provisional decision from our independent cloud services market investigation just came out a couple of weeks ago, and where the investigation panel there has been considering the impact of accelerated compute on the cloud market. And then, as you mentioned, the new digital markets competition regime just came into force on the 1st of January. And that regime, for those not familiar, allows us to consider a small number of firms for designation with so-called strategic market status, which can then allow us to put in place targeted rules to address positions of particularly entrenched market power in digital markets. So we've started 2 SMS investigations so far on search and on mobile ecosystems. And as you would imagine, in both cases, AI is a big feature. In fact, I think I'd struggle to think of any investigation that we could do under that new regime which wouldn't end up thinking about AI really quite a lot. But on those current 2, in search, we're thinking about it from a number of angles. Firstly, it's the extent of competition between Google's more traditional search product, the way it's integrating AI, and then other AI-enabled services, whether in terms of more the back end or in terms of being delivered through AI assistant type frameworks. And then we're also thinking there about the advertising side of search, which I think is very interesting in terms of AI, because actually the monetization of AI-enabled search isn't yet clear, I don't think. And so quite how that plays out will be quite important for our understanding of the competitive dynamics. And then in mobile, we're considering how AI developments might change either the nature of the products and services being delivered to consumers through mobile devices, and how Apple and Google's ecosystems might relate to the various other providers of those kinds of services. And in both investigations, we're really just wanting to make sure that services of all kinds, whether enabled through AI or otherwise, are able to compete on a level playing field, are able to innovate, are able to support growth. And in both investigations, we're really looking to pursue the very open and participative approach to external engagement that where we've been setting out our stall actually now for a number of years. And so I think on that note, if anyone here or watching has views on how AI might interact with these markets, then please do get in touch. We've just been running invitations to comment on those investigations, but that extensive external engagement will be going on throughout those investigations over the next few months.
Great, thank you so much. And really interesting to sort of see that evolution as well in terms of like how you started out with reporting on specific issues and how you're now very much using and kind of treating AI as a kind of business as usual issue as well. Great, we are also joined this morning by Andrew Breeze from Ofcom, Director of Technical Policy Development of the Ofcom Online Safety Group. And Andrew, we're very sort of, everyone in the room and in the UK is very aware of the Online Safety Act, which will come into force very shortly, and is a sort of very, another really sort of key example of regulation and new legislation in the UK. We're sort of very keen to hear about like how Ofcom balances its powers and to both kind of keep people safe online, but then also make sure that an online world with sort of AI-generated content can also support a sustainable economic growth. So really keen to hear from what work is doing that Ofcom is doing in this space.
Sure, thank you, and lovely to be here. I think I'll sort of start wide and then go narrow. So sort of thinking about it in the widest sense, I think Ofcom's always had the view since we were set up that good regulation and growth go hand in hand. And I think a big part of that is thinking not just about consumers today, but also about consumers in the future. I think that sort of comes across most clearly in the markets where we're an economic regulator, like fixed telecoms, where we have a part to play in creating a sort of regulatory strategy that ends up feeding into the sort of incentives that people have to invest. So if you take fixed telecoms, in 2018, I think we had 6% of the UK was fibre connected, or 6% of homes. It's now about 70%. So that's a big success story so far. And we'll be doing more work on that in the future. And so there's a big part in those economic regimes that's about incentives. And then, as Ed said, there's a really big part about sort of not accidentally creating barriers to entry, barriers to expansion by kind of placing undue regulatory burdens where they're not needed. And, one of our regulatory principles, it's on our website, is that we have a bias against intervention, although we will intervene promptly, if we need to. So that's sort of the big picture. And then the test comes when you get a brand new regime, like online safety. And if you're a regulatory nerd, and I would put my hand up and say that I am, online safety is a really interesting case because ChatGPT-1, which let's say that's the sort of explosion of generative AI, and I'm talking about generative AI in this sort of short chat, that's the moment where generative AI kind of explodes into the public consciousness. At that point, we're kind of 4 years into the 5-year development of the Online Safety Act. It's in Parliament as a bill, and obviously government looks at that and says, what do we do about this? And I think, what happened is there wasn't a wholesale rewrite of the bill to account for generative AI. So I think it's a really good test for those regulatory nerds of that claim that we always make, which is legislation is future-proof and it's tech-neutral. And this is a really good example as that technology of generative AI gets integrated into the kind of services that the Online Safety Act was designed to regulate. How is it working? So that's sort of the challenge. And then there's sort of how do we do it, which is the last thing I'll talk about. So, it starts with the Act. So you're looking at the Act and you're saying to the extent that generative AI is used in the sharing of content, where it may be harmful, that's likely to be caught to the extent that it gets built into the kinds of business models that the Act was designed to deal with. So search, user-to-user content sharing, and the sort of creation of regulated pornography. To that extent, that's something that we need to look at. So then, kind of in terms of how we do that, we have looked to and we have successfully integrated sort of thinking on Gen AI into our regulatory products. So, for example, our guidance to pornography providers, our guidance on the risk of illegal harms, which we published before Christmas. There are references to Gen AI throughout. We also, at times, take the opportunity to clarify to our stakeholders, our latest thinking on generative AI. So Towards the end of last year, we published an open letter which was triggered by some stories about character-based chatbots, but in that we set out the kind of broad typologies of cases where we think generative AI is covered by the regime and what people should do about it. So there are those sort of broadcast methods. Then we have outreach through our supervisory approach, typically to the largest platforms, but also to ones that present particular risks. And that can be, I guess, what you might call traditional online safety platforms who are integrating Gen AI, or it can be those platforms that are sort of Gen AI forward, but moving into the kind of regulated space. So there's that kind of outreach. We've also recently launched our digital support service, which is a kind of ready reckoner. So you can go on our website and you can say, you know, my service does this and this and this, and it will give you a kind of indicative view. Are you regulated? What do you need to do about it? We also have the hub, which Kate has talked about, you know, which is designed to help AI innovators. So there's lots of routes in to Ofcom and to get a sense of what our thinking is. And then I think the final thing I'll talk about is the sort of discussion papers. So last year, we published 2 discussion papers, one on deceptive deepfakes and the other on red teaming for AI safety. So if you'll let me do a bit of cross-selling, Ben, who is the sort of primary architect of that work, is talking tomorrow at just after lunch on the deepfakes paper. And in both of those cases, you know, we're using that opportunity to build our understanding, to signal to the world, you know, where our thinking is on AI safety. But we're also very much thinking about the kind of costs and burdens of regulation. So if you look at the red teaming paper at the back, there's a kind of estimate of how much resource we would, based on our current understanding, expect a red teaming exercise to cost. So we're always thinking about those sort of big picture barriers questions, that stuff about proportionality, and then trying to translate that into something really concrete to help innovators understand kind of what their obligations are, but also make sure that we're holding ourselves to account about kind of not inhibiting growth unnecessarily.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And again, like, so fascinating to hear about how you have sort of had to shift your focus, or at least kind of broaden your focus from fixed telecoms all the way to, you know, broadcasting and now like kind of online safety as well. And then last but definitely not least, we're also joined by Stephen Almond, who's an executive director for regulatory risk at the Information Commissioner's Office, the UK's data protection regulator. And Stephen, we are very keen to hear sort of what the ICO views are on the government's AI action plan, which was published just before earlier this year, and what you're sort of doing already at the ICO that kind of really resonates with the plan's recommendations as well. And then we're also very keen to hear sort of what role you think regulatory coordination plays in sort of enabling the plan.
Thank you. Well, look, let's kind of go back, I think, to where Kate started, you know, which is obviously AI is not new, nor is our approach to AI at the ICO. We've been publishing, I think, our first papers on how data protection law applies to AI over 10 years ago, and we have a whole wealth of policy and guidance that's available to support organisations to comply with data protection law. I suppose let's kind of then take a step back and go, why care about data protection law? You know, actually, the public will say, in terms of their concerns, their hopes, their fears around AI, there are some things they really want to see protected. They want to have assurance around the privacy of their information. They want to know that their information is kept safe and secure. They want transparency and explainability. They want accountability and redress. They want fairness out of these AI systems. And all of these things are built into the data protection regime. In terms of how we go about achieving those things at the ICO, my goal really is fundamentally to make sure that it is as easy as possible to introduce AI systems in the UK that are built with those principles in mind. So we have, akin to many of my fellow regulators on this panel, we have a range of innovation services, including our regulatory sandbox, but also including fast, frank feedback through our innovation advice service to enable organisations to really get it right first time, to land well-governed AI into the market, ideally faster and with greater appeal, so that it takes root in the market and really drives growth of responsible AI that we want to see. So we do that ourselves. We are really proud to see the government's AI action plan mirroring actually a lot of those expectations, I think, of regulators. There are a series of recommendations for how regulators should think around this, and they go to things like experimentation, for example, and expecting that regulators will lean in and support that innovation to grow, and that couldn't be closer to our mission at the ICO. It's one of our four key strategic enduring objectives is around enabling responsible innovation, sustainable growth in this area. In terms of kind of how that then translates into our work in terms of regulatory coordination, the short answer is you can't do it without coordinating across regulators, without, frankly, cooperating, integrating across regulators. Because we know that in the pursuit of certain regulatory goals, people will say, okay, there's some synergies, there's potentially some trade-offs between different regulatory goals in this area. How do we get the regulatory certainty that we need to be able to invest, that we need to be able to bring these great products forward as fast as possible, as we know that you want us to do? The answer then comes, well, how do we actually join up our positions? Do we join up our positions in, kind of bilaterally, jointly, through lots of different ways? We do that, so we've got the AI and Digital Hub, which has already been referenced, to provide that single point of contact to be able to access advice that's joined up across all the regulatory regimes. But we do it in other ways as well. With the Competition and Markets Authority, for example, later this year we'll be setting out a joint position around how competition, consumer protection and data protection law all integrate in this area, making sure that actually as people are going through questions around, well, what are regulatory expectations around open source versus closed source, and we know that competition might drive you towards this outcome or privacy might drive you towards this outcome, actually you've got clarity on exactly what you need to do to be able to comply with each of those regimes. I hope that gives a bit of a sense of where we're trying to get to here. We really want to be able to unlock the power of AI innovation. We really want to be able to unlock the opportunity of really responsible innovation in this space. And that's going to be from us working together, and it's going to be about us working at pace and really leaning in to making the best possible innovation happen.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And I really liked how you talk about sort of joining up those positions between regulators as well, because as Kate sort of mentioned at the start as well, with a concept like fairness, for example, like what is fair in one context might not be fair in another, and it's really, great to see how these conversations are happening between regulators as well. I've got one more question for Kate on the DRCF, and then I have two questions sort of for the entire panel. And thank you so much again for sort of giving us a sneak peek into all this important work that is happening. Kate, obviously, you're working together as part of DRCF, and it's really great to see. And as I said at the start, it's like a sort of a kind of world-leading initiative as well that many countries are learning from. However, there are sort of many other regulators in the UK as well that sort of look after use cases in AI, given that AI is sort of everywhere now. So I'm really kind of keen to hear what sort of role you see for other regulators outside of the DRCF as well, and how you're sort of ensuring that there's a sufficient degree of alignment and kind of collaboration as well with those regulators, and again, sort of with that growth objective in mind.
Absolutely. I mentioned earlier on, Isabelle, how AI is cutting across everything, right? And you hear about it every day, right? Whether it's AI in medical diagnostics, or it's AI in legal services, or it's AI in financial services, and so on. AI right across the economy. And what that means is that every UK regulator is interested in and thinking about this space. We have a mandate across our 4 regulators, but we often talk to and work with other regulators as well. So, for example, I mentioned our work on fairness and transparency, and we brought in the Equality and Human Rights Commission on that work. Some of our work on financial services, we have brought in the Bank of England, and of course the FCA also work with the Bank of England a lot anyway. Similarly with the payments systems regulator, and so on. So as far as we're concerned, we bring in other regulators for discrete projects where there's that intersectionality of interest. I think then the government isn't on this panel, but if you look at the AI Opportunities Action Plan and talk to the government, they talk about all regulators operating in this space. And as I say, it's primarily a matter of thinking about how existing laws apply. So, for example, if at the moment you're concerned about you want to make sure that if you do mobile banking that that's safe. What you want to know is if there's AI in your mobile banking, that doesn't expose you to any more risk of scams and fraud. Or if you're applying for a job, if now in the future there might be some kind of AI filter in the recruitment, you want to know that that doesn't mean there's going to be discrimination, right? That there's going to be fairness just as the same as if a human is doing that filtering. And so I think all regulators are really invested in that space separately and then where appropriate together.
That's great to hear. Great. Well, I now have a question for the entire panel, so whoever would like to jump in is very welcome to. And this is kind of rooted in the sense that, AI is, again, sort of is a cross-economy concept, but it's also a global technology, and the sort of rules are kind of very much cross-cutting across countries as well, and affected as well by international developments. And so there's like differences in compliance requirements across borders, and navigating that can be like really difficult. How are sort of regulators and yourselves working with your counterparts internationally to sort of address that challenge? Any volunteers?
I'm very happy to dive in. Look, you would expect me to say it's got to be absolutely at the core of what we are trying to do here. And even where legislative frameworks differ, and they do differ across jurisdictions, often the fundamental principles of what we're trying to achieve remain the same. And so we work extremely closely with our partners in the G7 with a much broader set of regulatory authorities through the Global Privacy Assembly. And we have done things like we've put out joint communiques setting out our expectations around how generative AI is developed and used, for example. Without that, what we end up with is, I suppose, really the potential for forum shopping in this area, for disconnected approaches to governance that are ultimately going to leave people more, facing greater risks, and are going to leave businesses trying to join up across jurisdictions and try and make the most of what could ultimately be conflicting requirements. So it's really incumbent on us as regulators, if we're really serious about protecting people, about enabling growth, then actually we really must do that join up across jurisdictions.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I think that's entirely right. And in the financial services world, right, there's quite a lot of global international bodies that bring together the different financial regulators across the world. So, and the FCA very much actively participates in that. So we currently chair the Financial Stability Board's Financial Innovation group jointly, and we work through IOSCO, which is International Securities Regulators, and we actually are a founding member of GFIN, which is the Global Financial Innovation Network. So there's lots of ways for us to work together with other jurisdictions to do some of the work that DRCF does on the domestic level, right? Just join up, understand, share some of the workload, look at the risks, look at the opportunities, and collaborate on that and try and get to a kind of common position.
Yeah, nice. I like those multiple levels of collaboration, like both internationally and domestically via the DRCF as well.
And I think just one thing I'd add from the Ofcom side is, on the online safety side, we similarly have a kind of global network, the Global Online Safety Regulators Network, which we're currently chairing. That's quite a nascent group as countries around the world are sort of creating online safety regimes. So that's quite an interesting space to be in, and that's a real kind of, online safety is a real cross-border regulatory challenge. Yeah. And then sort of more broadly, we also kind of have programmatic bilateral conversations with the various AI safety institutes around the world. I think often to understand where our remits touch and maybe overlap, and also to understand where they don't. Again, for that kind of bigger coordination piece, so that we're all moving in the right direction and not treading on each other's toes.
Yeah. And it's also like important to recognize that not every regulator has like a direct counterpart as well. So loads of complexities to navigate there. Any final thoughts from you, Will, or shall we move on to the next question?
Maybe just briefly to complete the set. I mean, it's a very reasonable ask from businesses out there for coherence, and that's coherence domestically, which is what this is all about, but also internationally. And I think we have to strike a balance there. And we work a lot at this. Actually, many of the similar mechanisms that Stephen mentioned, G7, OECD. There's an international competition network. We're actually hosting the annual meeting of that at Edinburgh in May this year. But there's a balance to be struck, because our duties are all about looking after the interests of UK people, businesses, and the UK economy. So we need to focus on that and the evidence about the conditions in the UK. But we also need to avoid sort of divergence for divergence's sake, just for the sake of being different. So we really do pay a lot of attention to what's going on elsewhere. There are similar legislative activities in all kinds of places: Australia, Europe, Germany, Japan, South Korea, India, Brazil now. And there's a lot of learning we can all do from one another in terms of what works or even what doesn't as well.
Perhaps the point I'd make, just to wrap up, is that there's always a lot of focus on what governments are doing together, like at the moment in Paris with the AI summit. And of course, that's hugely important. But it's also really important what regulators are doing. And you've just heard some examples, what actually goes on perhaps under that headline surface that actually is about coherence in a really practical way on an ongoing basis.
Okay, that's great to hear. And then for the final question, which might be my favorite one, if I'm allowed to have a favorite question, which I'd love to hear from everyone, and we'll perhaps start with Stephen, is basically asking, like, how are you as regulators adopting AI yourselves in operations, and sort of how are you improving internal processes or indeed your kind of operations with AI?
Well, look, I mean, as a regulator of AI, we firmly believe that we must adopt AI ourselves. You've got to know how people, every organisation is going to be deploying AI, and what better way than actually to be making sure that you can use it yourself. So we have a range of use cases, from deploying it through what we might call supervisory technologies to try and automate some of our interventions, particularly where we're trying to scrutinise a web that has got hundreds of millions of websites that all need to process data in accordance with privacy law. It's really important, actually, that we try and up our game in terms of automated scrutiny, right the way through to how we use tools internally within the office, such as generative AI tools that are being probably deployed in every organisation nationwide right now for tools like writing and so on and so forth.
Great. And
I think it's kind of Stephen's point, but just as the industries that we regulate are adopting AI, we definitely have to change the way they're operating, right? We have to adopt AI to change the way we regulate. I think we looked at the financial services industry. 75% of firms are already using some form of AI. A lot of it is focused in a couple of key areas on sort of operational efficiency and financial crime in FS, and that sort of mirrors a little bit where we're at the moment, right, in this first phase of Gen AI adoption in particular. Actually, we've led some work through DRCF on this, so I sponsor some of the work on this, and I think as every technologist tries to get to grips with what are the killer use cases, where's the most value going to be, it's been incredibly valuable to work together as four regulators and share a lot of the learning as we adopt it. Likewise, so I guess most of us receive a lot of unstructured information, text, data, documents, etc. That's a great use case for Gen AI, and it can help us kind of detect more harm and also operate more efficiently and improve the service that we provide to firms that we regulate as well. I think the other key point on this is building the capability, right? So that's one of the things DRCF helps with, but the FCA has spent over the last couple of years, really built its data analytics capabilities. So we now have over 75 data scientists in our organisation. I think that's critical because we need that kind of plasticity, that ability to kind of flex and adopt new skills and see where AI is going to lead us. And we're already seeing some of the benefits in other forms of data and use. So we take a feed of newly registered web domains. There are about 100,000 of those registered on a daily basis, and we use a variety of analytics techniques to help filter those through and spot scam websites, right? So that we can help protect consumers from those scams. We've actually also launched a collaboration with the Turing Institute where we're trying to go after, help enable industry to take more AI solutions to money laundering, right? Which is not a sort of victimless crime, because that money laundering is going to, the proceeds of that are fueling kind of terrorism, human trafficking, drugs, etc. And with the Turing, we're trying to generate a set of synthetic data that can help to develop new AI solutions for that and make that more effective. So I think the potential is massive. Like every organisation, we're just starting to experiment that. We probably haven't hit the killer use case yet, as I think most areas haven't, but we're seeing a lot of potential and a lot of benefit already.
That's really encouraging. We have slightly gone over time, but if there's any final kind of thoughts on this question, I'd love to hear them. Otherwise, I will open up for Q&A.
Maybe just briefly. I mean, I think it builds a bit on Ed's comments, actually. Yeah, the job of, I think, a large part of the job that most of our organisations do is taking large amounts of information and making sense of it, and then coming to reasonable judgments on the back of it. And of course, that's exactly where AI can help. I mean, even before generative AI, one of the earlier uses that we made was when COVID was going on at its peak. We had a COVID task force. We opened up the floodgates to complaints and inputs from the public and from companies, and had 100,000 approaches of various types in a very short space of time. And just the process of making sense of that and trying to sift out the signal from the noise is exactly the sort of thing where this can be really useful. But just as I talked about accountability and transparency earlier on, we certainly, and I know we all do, hold ourselves to extremely high standards in terms of the security of the information that we take in and hold and use. And that's the reason why we have to be extremely measured in the way that we pilot and test these new tools to make sure that we can safeguard that information in the same way when we use AI, just as we do in any other route.
Super important. Thank you so much for sharing. Andrew, Preet, any final reflections? Otherwise, we've got about 7 minutes for audience Q&A.
I'm happy to give it over to audience questions.
Amazing. So yeah, we have about 7.5 minutes, and I'll select like a couple of questions. I'm slightly blinded by the light, so don't feel offended if I don't make out your appearance. When you ask a question, please keep it brief and introduce yourself at the start as well. That really helps. Mackenzie, shall we start at the back with the back of the wall? Yes, that's you. Yeah.
Hello, my name's Tom Whittaker. I'm a lawyer at law firm Burgess Salmon. When we sit here in 12 months' time and we're talking about the progress that has been made, what's the one thing that you all hope to have seen as a big change? Or what's the one big thing that you expect to change in the next 12 months?
Lovely question. Andrew, shall we start with you?
I don't know if I'm the right person to start with. I'm not sure. Do I think there will be a change? Yeah, go ahead.
Shall I help you out?
Yeah.
Okay, so as DRCF, we have a 3-year vision. And the vision has 5 planks, but it's the 2 at the top that I think are the really key ones here. One is about protecting consumers, and the second one is about enabling innovation and growth. And I think in 12 months' time, if we can say that we're in an AI environment where innovation and growth are really being enabled, so that we're seeing AI coming more into our economy, all the sorts of practical implications that you read about in the news, NHS waiting lists coming down, et cetera, on the one hand, but at the same time, there is a commitment to responsibility such that consumers are protected, people's privacy is protected, people feel that they are being treated fairly, then that, I think, is the goal to aim for in 1 year and beyond, actually.
From our side, so the Information Commissioner, my boss is in Paris right now, and fingers crossed he said it, so I'm not stealing news, but we are setting for ourselves 3 really clear priority areas where we want to have an impact on how AI is used over the next year. One of those is around how foundation models developed, particularly given the fact that those base models are used for the building up of so many different AI use cases. A second is around how automated decisions are made, particularly where they are solely automated decisions. There isn't human review going on, and they're significant, and they're being taken in areas like in government or in recruitment, for example. The third, for us, where we are looking to have real impact over the coming year and more, is around the use of facial recognition technology, particularly by the police, and making sure that is fairly and lawfully deployed. We're hoping, of course, that in setting those areas that we want to have focus and impact on, we will also have an impact on the market as a whole. If we look at how automated decision-making is used in recruitment, for example, the same lessons should be learned for how automated decision-making is used in other sectors too. So we've chosen those areas particularly carefully, but sorry, I know it's not one area that we want to have impact on in the next 12 months, but 3, but that's a really key area of focus for us.
Nice. I think we have time maybe for 1 or 2 more questions, and we might bundle them up if we have to. The lady at the back over there, if we can get a mic to her, please. Yeah. And actually, that will be our final question, because we're running out of time.
Sophia Adams-Barty, policy expert. I've worked for many of the regulators on the panel today, and one of the questions I would have is how do you see the challenges around AI regulation really questioning some of the underpinning norms of the regulatory models that we've all deployed for the last 20 or 30 years?
Who would like to start on that one?
Maybe I'll say something. I think, so we published a document last year in response to the government's request and our AI update. I think what that really says is many of the current, our existing regulatory principles and outcomes that we're focused on apply to AI in the same way. I don't think we currently see a massive gap in the industry in financial services regulation, which we need to plug with a new kind of AI piece. I think our focus is on making sure that we can engage with firms and help them understand how those things, or those existing regulations, apply in the context of AI. And that is the message we've also had back from industry as well.
Great to hear. Yes, please, Will.
So I do think that AI, just like any other new technology, underlines the importance of flexible concepts, in our case driven largely by economics, rather than attaching things particularly to a certain technology. So I think that flexibility is important, so I guess there's a consistency there from previously, but what's different, I think, is the need for us to be moving quicker as the market moves quicker and try and work out what's going on as it's happening, which I think probably is a change compared to the speed of operation that perhaps people in the world of regulation were used to a few years ago.
Thank you.
I'd echo that and say, actually, for us, it's really reinforced the value of having principles-based, technology-neutral regulation that is actually able to adapt to whatever comes next. It's also really reinforced the importance of an agile regulatory model, where we are really throwing our weight into horizon scanning for changes, where we are producing outcome-focused guidance, where we are investing and engaging in innovation. So we're providing regulatory sandboxes, where we're partnering with the other organisations, whether it's internationally, domestically, or actually whether it is with industry themselves here, around how we get the governance of this right, recognising that AI cuts across all of these regulatory regimes and will continue to do so.
Thank you so much. That's unfortunately all we have time for today, but please continue the conversation afterwards as well. Please join me in thanking the brilliant panel for sharing all of their insights.